Thank you. Wow. I feel really lucky to be up here and celebrate my book with you. There's so many of you that I know over the years with writing and friends and teaching in high school, and it's just a good celebration of coming together, and I feel really proud of the book. The other way I feel lucky is that I've been able to have my ancestors' stories probably pretty easily. When I was 9 years old, I actually was rummaging around in the house because my parents were gone and there was nothing else to do, and I found a scrapbook that was from my grandmother, and I realized that through my grandmother's life, she and my grandfather had some pretty incredible experiences. Even at that time, the articles were from the 1890s, and I'm like, whoa, you went through that? You did that? Oh my goodness. Then I had the lucky chance, not chance, but it's birthright and DNA and all that stuff. I got the mom and dad that I did. My mom, Barbara Mahoney, she lived in Santa Cruz with us here during the last 10 years of her life. And over the years, she actually told me these stories. And she said, you know, Jeannie, you really ought to write these down. And so I did. And I would go up to Dominican Oaks and I'd have a story fresh and I'd say, okay, Mom, what do you think? She said, well, I think you got it. And that was a good joy to me. And my brother and I both were happy to share the time in her life with her and telling these ancestor stories. My mother also saved things from my grandparents. I have here my grandma's cookbook from 1915, Crisco cookbook, put out by the Crisco Company. And as I was writing the stories, I realized I should look through this book. Well, the first page that you open to is cakes, and it's covered with flour and sugar, and my grandma loved to bake, and so did my mom. But the fascinating thing is that there's probably 8 different cakes on this one page. Golden orange cake, gold cake, hurry up cake, sand cake, Lady Baltimore cake, eclairs, and it just goes on and on. And so I have these treasures. My mom was careful to label things too. She said, okay, here's your grandmother's palette. She used this in high school. And in the back of the book, you'll see there are many paintings that my grandmother did. And they hung in our house when I was a child, and my wife and I have inherited one very special one. So I came from these people that told me stories, and just to say that my mom was lucky enough to read the very last story 2 weeks before she passed away. She turned the pages slowly, very carefully reading. Then she closed the book and she said, that was very nice. That's high praise from my mom. So, when I was very young, I did know my grandparents, Charlotte and Philip, and they really had adventurous lives. They are the heart of this book, and so I want to tell you the stories about my ancestors. They are the brave hearts. So the first thing I'm going to do is read you from the prologue of the book, and I couldn't figure out how to get into their stories, and then all of a sudden I got the first line and I figured out, because I knew that I wanted to tell my brother's grandchildren and all of you about these people, and I wanted to have them understand that they're real. So this is the prologue. Do not be fooled. These are people. They are the same as you, as me. Different times and different climate, different news. Sometimes they're from the same town you grew up in, and sometimes not. They worried about their families, and they were proud of their children. They had bad days and good days, and days when they didn't know which end was up. Things went wrong for them, and things went right. The thing is, these are your people. Whether you're born into this family or not, everyone has people. Sometimes you see life the way they did. You find that you would have their eyes, their hair, their hands, that smile of yours. In this book, their names are Margaret and Ellen and James, Patrick and Anna, Marie Louise and Garrett, Philip and Lottie. Their parents called them home for dinner by those names. just like yours did, just like yours. And just like you, they had days when they were young and the world was theirs. They could do anything: cross oceans, settle in new lands, look for work, build a house, cut the lumber to make that house. They could do anything. They played hard. They skipped rope, and they played baseball, and kicked the can and hide and seek. They hunted for ducks in the Sacramento Delta, and they pulled water from wells in Ireland. They ran to school, and they also rode there on horseback. They learned to read and write. They did sums in their heads and on paper. They ran businesses. They hauled hay, grain, and coal in wagons up and down city streets, and they held reins above teams of horses. They drove their crops to the pier. They loaded grain onto barges and then sailed them into the city of San Francisco. They cooked and washed and cooked and washed and did it again and again and again. They sewed their own wedding dresses. They hardly ever bought clothes from a store. They put their hair in pigtails, and of course they played tricks on each other. They kept dogs as pets. They lived on farms. Later they wore fancy hats, and they walked the streets of San Francisco. They lived through earthquakes, big and small. They held their babies until a shaking stopped, and my grandfather did rescue work that day by the ferry building. Oh, they had grand parties, and they learned elocution. My grandmother recited poems out loud. They played the fiddle, they danced the jig and the foxtrot. They waltzed with their fiancés. They listened to the radio, and a couple of them, my grandparents, owned a silent movie theater in the 1920s. Oh, they laughed until tears ran down their cheeks, and they cried sometimes because they missed their folks back in Ireland. But they became Californians, people who knew the redwoods and breathed the salt air and fog of the Pacific Ocean. Now, we breathe the same air. We walk the same streets, and we seek the same refuge in our family and in our friends. Oh, we marvel at how clever we are, and we strike our foreheads when we get surprised. We cry when we're sad. They got confused by life too. Don't be fooled. I want to tell you their stories. They're just people like you and I. They're just folks who lived a long while ago. Thank you.